Hey everyone, it's Mr. Huffman, and this is another lecture that I want you to take in for this first unit, Exploration and Colonization, 1492 to roughly 1763. And this one, again, I've kind of emphasized, if I've seen you in class already, that there are certain groups that we really don't pay as much attention to as we should. And even when we do pay attention to them, there's often gaps in our understandings or our appreciations of them. And I can think of no group more in American history that's true of than Native Americans. And in particular, I want us to think about Native Americans and the myth of monoculture. And I'll talk about what monoculture as an idea really is here in just a moment. But essentially, it's this idea that we think of all Native Americans as one and the same, right? That they all had the same cultures, they all had the same ideas, they all had the same values, when in reality, that's not quite the case. And I'm going to talk about maybe why we think of them that way and the problems with thinking of them that way. Okay. So first, what is monoculture? Now, monoculture actually kind of is typically used as an agricultural term, but it can be used as a kind of anthropological or a cultural, social cultural term as well. And that is a culture dominated by a single element marked by homogeneity. So just kind of think of, any given farm field where you have all the same thing, whether it be beans or corn or what have you, okay, potatoes, anything. When you look at this field here, you say, oh, that's all one and the same. You could pick one potato here. You could go almost a mile away and pick the same potato almost out of the same ground, right? Even though it's a mile away, right? But in actuality, people naturally are going to be a lot more complicated than that. But oftentimes we view whole cultures and whole even continents worth of people as, oh, they're all one and the same. They're all, the exact same thing. I can guarantee you that's not the case. However, there are, what's the positives of viewing cultures as this one single thing? Well, as, cultural critics or just cultural kind of historians or anyone who's experiencing culture, a positive is that it makes classifying things a lot easier, right? You can kind of say, okay, this white person is like this white person. This white person in England is the same as this white person in France. Now, they might have a lot of similarities, but in actuality, if you dug into it, they're going to have probably a lot of different values, a lot of different things that they hold dear. Language even is going to be different, maybe. Okay, that's going to be a fundamental thing, right? They don't even speak the same language. So, as you can imagine, two people might look the same on the surface, but in actuality, underneath that, there's going to be lots of differences. Okay. So, as I'm saying, one big negative of viewing peoples in general through the idea of a monoculture is it can result in stereotypes or cliches, right? You can just say, well, all black people look and feel like and talk like this. All white people look, feel, and talk like this. All Asian peoples, African peoples, whatever. Okay, so naturally, there's lots of problems because what we're doing is we're kind of saying, oh, all these people are one and the same, when again, in reality, that's not true. There's going to be lots of different things within cultures. And again, I want us to take this idea of the monoculture and the problems with it and think especially about Native Americans. But it can be used against Europeans as well, right? Native Americans, as Europeans were coming over, see them all as, oh, these are just all one and the same versions of the white man or the white people, right? And to them, the results often were the same, right, as far as enslavement or death on the part of Native Americans. But again, in actuality, obviously, somebody from Spain and somebody from England aren't going to speak the same language. They're going to have different religions even. English are going to be typically more Anglican or Protestant. Spanish going to be more Catholic, so the religion's different. But to them, the Native Americans looking at the white Europeans, they all kind of seem one and the same, right? When that's not quite true even. But I want us to, again, think about that with Native Americans. So, as I said, this can be applied to specific countries or whole continents. Now, you could take two white people just even living in the United States right here, right now, right? Say somebody from rural Iowa and somebody from urban California, right? That maybe on the surface look the same as far as their features. Maybe, well, they both speak English, but you're even going to see the dialects that they're speaking English with are going to be different. You're going to have probably different religious beliefs, different political beliefs, different interests. Okay, so again, think of it that way, that just because two people look sort of similar, they could have vast differences in that. And that goes, again, not just thinking about Native American cultures. That can be applied worldwide in any era, right? That's a problem that we say even on an interpersonal basis of people looking similar, we think they are similar in every way. Again, not quite true. Okay, so again, it can be specific countries or entire whole continents. So I'm going to kind of break it down as far as us thinking about different regions of Native Americans and some shared traits that they have. So even within these certain regions, you're not going to see Native Americans that have all the same stuff going on, but you will see commonalities in terms of geography or climate often dictated. Okay, so in South Central Arizona, one of the biggest Native American tribes in the American Southwest in South Central Arizona was the Hohokam. Okay, that's how you say it. Yeah, the Hohokam. So the Hohokam, South Central Arizona, like I said, advanced system of irrigation canals, right? So this was similar to what I was saying about the Aztecs the other day, that they had very sophisticated canals to bring water in and out of cities or communities and to kind of, get rid of any waste. They had actually as many as hundreds of miles of those in South Central Arizona, right? So that's showing you that, hey, listen, we might think of civilization as being what's going on in Europe, but we're seeing thriving civilizations here in the Americas with certain tribes like the Hohokam. Okay, so what did they grow? Well, kind of being in this arid desert environment, corn, cotton, beans, squash, all able to grow, as well as colored pottery, turquoise pendants as far as what they produced, and they even used cactus juice to etch shells, right? So obviously this is a very tough, rugged environment, but they're still finding ways to kind of thrive despite how tough that environment is. So that just shows you these people were very self-sufficient, very smart as far as using the environment to their advantage. And so they might not kind of fit the qualifications of what a learned civilization is in Europe, but as far as here in the Americas, they're doing just fine. Okay. Now, they were there we're not sure when exactly they were there, but they were, as far as when they originated there, but they were kind of there through really maybe 1000 to about 1500 AD, and they are going to leave that area due to competition from some other tribes for some farmland. So they're not even going to stay there really until the Spanish even totally find them there in South Central Arizona. They leave the area in about 1500 on their own accord due to, again, increased competition for farmland. So again, hopefully you're seeing here, that this is a certain kind of Native American experience, but it's not going to be the universal one as I'm talking about some of these other ones here. Okay. So again, like I said, they end up leaving this area in about 1500. That's not too long after Chris Columbus kind of found the kind of islands in Honduras in 1492. So again, this isn't due to Spanish kind of coming in, but they do leave due to increased competition for farmland. Okay, another tribe of the American Southwest, the Anasazi tribe. Okay, and the Anasazi tribe are going to be located essentially in the Four Corners area, and where that is geographically in the modern U.S., Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. Very similar to kind of the Hohokam tribe. They had a network of basins and ditches to channel rainwater. Okay, so again, they're in this tough, arid desert environment, but they were able to build these basins to able to collect all the rainwater they can and to sustain themselves, right? And so again, even in this tough environment, you're seeing that they're being very self-sufficient. You may have heard or seen these before. Pueblos were the names of the large multi-story buildings made of adobe and cut stone that actually had elaborate secret passageways, right? So they were kind of carved almost into the side of these rocks and these mountains. And again, pretty sophisticated. Could fit as many as 1,000 people, 1,000 people in these areas, right? So again, that's incredible that you can fit so many people within these areas that from a distance look so small. But if you get up closer to them, you're going to see, oh, wow, again, large multi-story buildings can fit as many as 1,000 people. So yet again, in the American Southwest, tough environment, but tribes like the Hohokam and like the Anasazi tribe are finding ways to thrive and finding ways to, again, be pretty self-sustaining in their own right, even in this, again, arid desert environment. So again, those pueblos could fit as many as 1,000 people. That's pretty incredible. It's almost the suburbs of their day or the neighborhoods of their day, right? That could fit that many people. So another tribe of the American Southwest, they're going to be descendants of both groups. So that Hohokam tribe and the what tribe did I just say? Oh, the Nsazi tribe are going to come together and are going to create this other tribe that's kind of a combination of the two. So just like in a lot of ways in Europe, that you had certain nations kind of over the years kind of be an amalgam of other nations or other civilizations, the same thing happens with Native Americans. Over 50 of these descendants of both groups are going to be present before European contact, okay? Again, in the American Southwest, I've said it already a few times, corn. Corn is going to be essential to surviving in this arid desert environment. And so corn is going to happen and thrive there. Okay. Men are going to farm naturally, going to be the primary farmers in the American Southwest. They're also weaving clothing, blankets, making moccasins, all sorts of things that kind of keep your clothing maintained. Okay. Women, a kind of a similar function they serve in Native American cultures as they do even in European cultures. Women are there preparing meals, crafting pottery, and baskets as well. More than anything, though, they're collaborative, right? Men and women are working together to basically develop and build houses, okay? Now, the Apache and the Navajo are actually going to drive out a lot of these loosely aligned groups anywhere between 1200 and 1500 AD. So that's kind of over, again, a roughly 300-year period that descendants of both of those groups, the Hohokam and the Nsazi tribes, are going to be driven out of their area by the more kind of fearsome and more powerful Apache and Navajo groups, okay, again, over that time. So the Hohokam and the Nsazi, they had control of the American Southwest for some years, hundreds of years, and then the Apache and the Navajo, they kind of rolled in and subsumed those tribes and kind of made them a part of their own, conquered them in their own way. But it wasn't kind of in the same way that they were killing everybody off. Sometimes it was kind of more that those people kind of would rather maybe join the Apache or the Navajo tribes, but it just depended, right? So again, American Southwest, the Hohokam, Nsazi, Apache, Navajo. So all of them naturally had different kind of values in their own way, but all of them are competing in their own way for the same amount of land or the same amount of space, okay? What about if we're moving further east, right? So all that's going on in the Southwest, the American West. What if we go a little further east? Okay, so there's the Mississippian tribe, okay? And as you can imagine, that's going to kind of mostly exist in the Mississippi River area and in Mississippi, the future state itself, okay? So the Mississippians, they themselves are going to peak somewhere between 1050 and 1250 AD. So that's kind of their heyday, is between that 200-year period. They're great builders, right? You can see here they kind of make some pretty big, sophisticated kind of housing and buildings. They have kind of intense maize developments as well as bean cultivation. So the Mississippians, that's what separated them. The American Southwest tribes, they were great builders in their own way, but naturally, having more trees, having more shrubbery to work with, the Mississippians are going to kind of have an edge in that regard as far as being able to cultivate all that stuff, okay? The Cahokia, largest city, 5 square miles, over 100 pyramid structures. You can see that there, and over 16,000 people. So that's going to be the largest city of the Mississippian tribe. Okay, so again, similar to some of those cities I talked about with the Aztecs. They're going to, again, that's a pretty sizable city. Again, 5 square miles at that time, and all around the world would have been a big city, and over 100 pyramid structures, over 16,000 people. Now, the Mississippian tribe ends under mysterious circumstances. We're not quite sure why they ended. One theory is they might have been attacked by other tribes. Another is they maybe had a famine. Again, we're not exactly sure, even all these years later, is what happened to the Mississippian tribe. Nonetheless, they kind of disappeared or were subsumed into other tribes. Another thing possibly is that they were unsupportable by the resources that they had, that their population got too big, and that some of those Native Americans decided, well, I'm going to go join this other tribe because this one's getting too big. Again, for whatever reason, they peaked between 1050 and 1250, which is well before any European contact happened. Okay, that was on their own accord. So again, maybe they were attacked by other tribes. Maybe there was a famine. Ultimately, they did grow a little bit too big to sustain, and a lot of the people went off and kind of joined other tribes. Okay. So, what's again moving a little further east, southeastern tribes. Now, this is a little bit closer to our own kind of backyard, our own home territory here in the Carolinas, or in the kind of southeast region of the country. Okay, so you can see here on this map, lots of tribes kind of all around the southeast here. Okay, one that might immediately jump out to you is the Cherokee. Okay, because you've probably heard of the Cherokee in Western North Carolina. Now, what was interesting about all these southeastern tribes is almost all of them lived in towns. Okay, so they had something a lot that was be a lot closer to what a lot of European settlers are going to create themselves, where their towns, buildings arranged around a central plaza, right? So you have a kind of a central plaza in the town, where maybe the town elders or the town council will meet, and then you kind of have everything surrounding that. Okay. In the American Southeast, again, a lot more kind of trees and shrubbery than you would see in the Southwest or the kind of the Western regions. So houses are going to be built on poles, covered with grass, mud, thatch. Now, mud might sound pretty, nasty or whatever, but once it dries, and it's going to act as kind of a hardened, almost kind of mason kind of a support structure to keep those houses up. Okay. So similarly, kind of what I was saying with the gender roles, and another one in the American Southwest, but it is a little different. Women are going to farm. Men, meanwhile, in these regions are going to hunt deer, bear, wildfowl, even some alligator. Okay, so I've never had alligator myself. Maybe you have. Maybe it's good. I don't know. Feel free to leave a little comment if you had. I'd be curious to know what it tastes like. Okay, so like I said, in all cultures, you're going to naturally have gender roles between man and woman, but we're going to see here in a little bit later, it's not always the ones you maybe expect. Okay, so who are some of the largest tribes of the Southeast? The Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Natchez tribes. Okay, and really one of the biggest ones also was the Creek, and you can kind of see here the Creek controlled kind of this area of South Carolina as well as into Georgia. Okay, and they also, in the Creek, what was known about them is they had larger villages, as many as 50 villages across their kind of little empire or their territory, again spread throughout not only South Carolina there, but through Georgia and Alabama. Okay, so they're, again, one of the most notable ones. But as you could expect, like I said, the Cherokee for us as North Carolinians are going to be arguably the most notable ones, the ones that we most remember here in the Carolinas. Okay, and they're ultimately going to be the largest in the Southeast. So not just in North Carolina, but across the Southeast, the Cherokee are going to be the largest. Okay, so where are they at? Again, Western North Carolina extending over into the border of Eastern Tennessee. Their population's somewhere between, about 20,000 spread across some 50 villages. Okay, so across 50 villages, 20,000. Again, even in Europe, that would be a pretty decently sized kind of number as far as population goes. So they certainly had a lot going on there. Okay, now my face is kind of blocking this out, but you should be able to see this in the classroom version up. The thing that's interesting about the Cherokee is that their language is associated through the Iroquoian language group. And I'm going to talk about the Iroquois in just a moment. And what I want to draw attention to this is that their language is their own, but it's a part of a larger language tree. So the Cherokee had their own language, but it's kind of part of a larger language, or the Iroquois language group. Similar to how a lot of languages in Europe stem from or come from Latin, right? So you have English, French, Spanish, Italian, many European languages all come from Latin. Now, they're all different, but Latin was their base, and then all these other languages came out of that, right? So the same thing was true of Native American cultures. You kind of had like Latin, the Iroquoian language group, and then you had all these other Native American languages that came from or stemmed from that, right? So in that way, very similar to Europe, just in the way, again, Latin is that stem or root language. Iroquois ended up being that root language for Native Americans, that the Cherokee language and many other Native American languages were built and kind of come from. Okay, so again, very similar to Europe in that sense, as far as trying to say, hey, listen, there might be similarities or commonalities, but within that, there's lots of different options, right? So hopefully you're starting to see that. So Great Plains Indians. What about those? Or Great Plains Native Americans, I should say. Okay. So upon European arrival, Great Plains Native Americans were mostly nomadic, meaning that they traveled from place to place. They didn't stay in one place for too long, in part because the Great Plains, really at that time, there wasn't a lot of farming prospects. Okay. So the Great Plains, it wasn't so great, really. Okay. They actually was kind of really tough to cultivate farmland there. So what happened was that, well, we can't stay in one place for too long because the land's not great. So instead, we'll just be nomadic and go all around. Okay. Now, these Great Plains Native Americans were shaped by that Mississippian culture, right? So that Mississippian people, it dissolved and kind of broke up, but a lot of remnants of that culture ended up being kind of dispersed across these various nomadic tribes. Okay. Now, this might be a little bit of a surprise. It is even to me, even though I kind of know this stuff. Great Plains Native Americans actually did not even have horses until the Spanish brought them over from Europe in the 1500s. Okay, so we kind of picture, you see in Westerns or depictions of Native Americans often that they were on horses. But again, they didn't have horses until the Spanish brought them over, right? So it wasn't only until really the 1500s where all of a sudden, when those were brought over, Native Americans used to use those horses and quickly mastered those horses, right? The Sioux in particular were the ones that kind of most encountered and mastered horses, right? And very quickly, from not having any to all of a sudden having horses, the Sioux people, the Sioux warriors in particular, are going to become among the greatest mounted hunters and warriors in the world, right? At this time in the 15 and 1600s, if you put a Sioux warrior on a horse up against practically the best of all across the world, the best of Asia, the best of Europe, or kind of a one-on-one match, if you want to think about it, as far as a fight to the death, it's a pretty good chance that this Sioux warrior is actually going to best anyone all across the world, right? That's how dangerous, that's how kind of powerful they were on these horses. So again, quick learners, all these Native American groups are, right? Didn't have horses for so long. All of a sudden, the Sioux, they get on horses. Again, like I said, they could go up against any warrior all across Europe, across Africa, across Asia, anywhere. They would hold their own, if not best, anyone they'd fight against. All right. So again, those Great Plains Native Americans, lots of different groups there. I won't get into too many specific ones, but many of them, again, shaped by that Mississippian culture that dissolved over time. But there are still going to be, groups that form that are going to be powerful, like the Sioux. Okay. So what about in the Northeast, right? In the northeastern Native American peoples. As you can see here, lots and lots of different groups. Almost 1 million square miles of woodland. So in this area in particular, they're going to have lots of woods, lots of forests to kind of pick through. Okay, so that leads naturally to an amazing range of plant and animal life. Hunting, fishing, farming, all that good stuff is going to happen here. Deer are especially going to be very plentiful here. So deer is going to naturally be used, a lot of deer for food, as well as for animal hides, kind of for dress, and for kind of creating any sort of structures. Okay, I'll leave that here just for a second. So, and a lot of these Native American groups here in particular, we're going to be talking about to some degree soon in regards to European settlers dealing with these peoples, because again, this is where a lot of the kind of first English settlers are going to go, naturally, is in the northeastern part of the future United States, in particular the Powhatan and the some of these other Iroquois tribes up here. Okay, so again, lots of small ones, Iroquois right up there, kind of in New York area, but there's going to ultimately be really kind of a collection of Native American tribes that I want you to remember. But again, deer, lots of great animal life in this Northeast that they're going to take massive advantage of. Okay, so the Algonquins, they're going to live kind of in the New England area, the series of Algonquin tribes. What are some of those tribes? The Wampanoag, which are in kind of Massachusetts, the Narragansett in Rhode Island, and the Pequot in Connecticut. But the most important, and you're going to hear me talk about this, especially talking about the English settlers, the Powhatan Confederacy, especially in the Virginia area, right? So Jamestown, when we talk about that, Pocahontas, John Smith, all that, that's all mostly talking about the Powhatan Confederacy in Virginia. Again, when it comes to this region of the country, they're going to be among the first to encounter settlers, in this case, English settlers. Okay. So, Powhatan Confederacy and many of these other Algonquin tribes are going to really practice slash and burn agriculture. And I got a picture of that in the next slide of what that is. Essentially, what that is you'll grow something in an area, chop it all down, burn it. So that way, everything's burned to the ground. All those ashes actually replenish the soil. Okay, so it might seem destructive at first. Wait, why are they chop everything down after they harvest everything, burn it, and what happens though is those ashes end up replenishing the soil and end up really helping them out, not just farm in the future, but to farm many futures from there. Okay, so again, quick review again. Algonquin kind of series of tribes. All these other tribes don't need to remember them as much, but the Powhatan Confederacy I would remember because, again, that's in Virginia, and these are going to be among the very first to encounter settlers. Here's a picture again, slash and burn agriculture. This is, even still to this day, practiced in large swaths of Asia, as far as in a lot of Asian territories. They practice this as well. Works very kind of fruitfully for everyone involved, okay? So, Iroquois Confederacy, this is mostly in New York and southern Ontario, which is going into Canada. Okay. So what's interesting about this is the Iroquois Confederacy are going to actually be almost a kind of a council of tribes formed by the Seneca tribe, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk tribes to fight off the more powerful Huron tribe. So the Huron tribe was this kind of regional power in the Northeast, in that New York and southern Ontario area. So in that northeastern area, the powerful Huron tribes just kind of beating up and bullying a lot of these smaller tribes. So what happens are a lot of these smaller tribes, they get together and form the Iroquois Confederacy. And this is pretty notable because the Iroquois Confederacy end up creating the Great Binding Law, which is going to actually serve as the very first oral constitution that defined how the Confederacy worked. So you might be thinking about the Mayflower Compact or eventually the Declaration of Independence, right? Some sort, or the American Constitution, right? But this shows you, hey, Native Americans, they had their own versions of laws. They had their own version of a constitution as well. And the Great Binding Law was that. So in the same way that the colonies eventually formed together to fight Great Britain, we'll talk about that in Unit 2 with the American Revolution, the same way that colonies teamed up, Native American tribes were all for teaming up as well. So sometimes we think of Native American tribes as, again, either being all the same thing or that they were at war all the time. Not quite true. And like you can see here, many of them formed alliances to fight off maybe larger tribes or common enemies. In this case, the Huron tribe was a common enemy of these smaller tribes, the Seneca, the Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and the Mohawk. They then came together and said, hey, let's form the Iroquois Confederacy to fight off that Huron tribe. And like I said, Great Binding Law is going to be their kind of governing constitution. Now, very notable in Native American cultures is going to be within the Iroquois Confederacy, women. Okay, so women are actually going to have powerful positions of importance within the Iroquois Confederacy, these Iroquois tribes, okay? So the women actually nominate which males served on the councils. The women themselves didn't necessarily serve on the councils, but they were in charge of nominating what men did go on the councils. So women naturally having a big part of that. And my face is kind of blocking this here. They could even kick out members of the council that they disagreed with their rulings, right? So again, women weren't necessarily serving on these councils, but they had a large sway of who was on the council and getting rid of or ousting people who were not doing what they wanted. So, we sometimes think that women were only subservient maybe in Native American cultures. That's not true, okay? Because within the Iroquois Confederacy, women actually held pretty prominent positions of power. So yay for that, right? Here's kind of a picture of these kind of huts or structures that a lot of these kind of peoples lived and worked in, these northeastern tribes in particular. So, final slide. So, where do we take all this information, right? Again, Native American cultures living under certain conditions, similar conditions, and sometimes they have the same crops. Sometimes the gender roles are similar. As I said, with a kind of that Iroquois language group, sometimes the languages are similar, But, and this is a big but, larger flaws still exist in our understanding of Native Americans, right? That hopefully you saw all those differences within all those cultures mean that there is no monoculture, right? That again, the monoculture, it's more prevalent in thinking about Native American cultures than it is even in our larger associations with Europe, right? So we might say all Europeans or all European nations, but we still think of instinctively, oh, we still think of England, France, Great Britain, Spain, all those kind of different European nations, right? But again, in actuality, they're all different. We need to start applying that concept more to Native Americans, right? Because that's really leads to lots of problems. Because what happens is when we create and buy into monocultures that all these people are the same thing, there's they're only similar, there's no differences. What that leads to is it increases the chances of genocide. Okay, and as we're moving forward through American history, unfortunately, we're going to be talking about the various genocides of Native American peoples. We already saw that some with the Spanish, as far as kind of actively killing off maybe the Aztecs or the Incan empires, but also unknowingly bringing these diseases that were on form of genocide. Okay, so when we get into kind of English settlement, and as the English are dealing with Native Americans, and eventually as the United States will deal with Native Americans, unfortunately, oftentimes we bought into these concepts of monocultures, which again led to chances of genocide. Because if we're saying all people are the same thing, that leads to a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding, that again leads to unfortunate genocide. Right? Ultimately, why is all this done? Why are monocultures created? Might guess this. Usually done in the name of business, in the name of trade, in the name of money. Right? It's easier to make money if we kind of say everyone is either in this camp or this camp. No similarities in between. It's easy for us if we buy into monocultures to aid the kind of basically the acquisition of trade or business. Okay, so really that's why these things are created, to help somebody make some money. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of a greater understanding of these differences between the Native American cultures and why maybe we need to adjust our thinkings and our understandings of that. Okay, so this is Mr. Huffman. Thanks for watching. Again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Take care.